Our lymphatic system. So this is the system that is in charge of filtering and maintaining certain nutrients within our body, which is helping our digestive system, our cardiovascular system. It's also helping to maintain our fluid balance within our body and to fight off disease. So you might think of your lymphatic as just a disease fighter, but it really has a lot more going on. The functions of the parts of the anatomy for the lymphatic system that we are going to look at are on page 655. So only three functions for this very important system, but I need to make sure that you know that not only is it part of our body's defense, but also removing that excess fluid that we don't need. It is in charge of transporting fats and fat-soluble vitamins and then protecting our body as a defense mechanism. So it does have three parts to the physiology. The picture that I have here, we're going to look at for several different things. This picture is on page 656. So there's several reasons why I picked this picture to start with. Partly because it shows you the little green dots are the lymph nodes. It also shows you the major organs that are associated with the lymphatic system. But see the little blue-green guy on the bottom? He's also really important for how our body operates. So first, let's go back to page 655 and let's talk about lymph. So lymph itself is lymphatic fluid. So it's a colorless, watery fluid that is circulating throughout our body. So this is the fluid that's in between spaces. It comes from all types of tissue in our body. It is part of the plasma that we learned about in chapter 26, and it's pushed out of the capillaries when it's being filtered. So it is called lymph, but it is lymph fluid. It's the same thing. But we do have lymphatics, which are our capillaries, our vessels, our trunks, and our ducts that are part of this lymphatic chain. So part of the fluid chain that's moving all throughout our body. We're going to talk about several different ones, and then we're going to look at the little blue-green guy, and then we're going to look at another picture. So I mentioned that one of the lymphatics is capillaries. So this is a closed end sac. So just remember that as we move forward. A lacteal is a little projection that is part of what is protecting our digestive system from things that we don't want in there. So again, we're going to look at these things, but first they give us these definitions. The capillaries have to come together to get a lymph vessel. And then we mentioned trunks. So these trunks, are parts of the drain, which brings us to our blue-green guy. So when you look at this guy, he's definitely not looking like he's balanced. The right looks different from the left, or the blue looks different from the green. So this is part of, the right lymphatic duct, which is draining the right side of the head and the neck, and the right upper extremity or right upper arm, and the right half of my upper body and my upper subclavian area. The rest is the left. So the thoracic duct is the rest of the body. So the blue area is the thoracic duct, and the green area is the right lymphatic duct. And together, that is how my body and all of the capillaries, vessels, and trunks, and everything along that chain is moving the lymph all throughout my body so that it can be exchanged, do what it needs to do, transport those fats, fat-soluble things, provide those defense mechanisms. So the blue-green guy looks kind of weird, but that's how our body is balanced, or how it's created. But how the lymph is moved through is a little different. This picture is the lymphatic capillary, which then goes to meet the bigger vessel. So what I want you to look at before we even talk about how the lymph moves throughout our body is that we have to notice that when you look at these yellow arrows, there's only one way that fluid can come into our capillary. So there's one direction that it can come in and one direction of flow. That's going to be important before we talk about how the lymph moves throughout our body. So this is just a little up close picture of that capillary and what's happening as the movement occurs. In this picture, I want you to notice the vessels themselves. And then look at the upper right-hand picture to see where the capillaries are. So it's just showing you the different sizes of how things are moving through. The movement of lymph is occurring. So it depends on what we're doing as far as our lymphatic movement. Probably you've heard the thing that people say, oh, if you go out and take a walk, you'll feel better. But that's because we've moved our lymph. We've caused that milking action of our bones and our muscles moving. It's made the contractions happen within our lymphatic system. So it's just flowing that around. It's flowing our lymph, which again is going to help with many things. Part of it is our fluid balance. Part of it is our disease fighting, but also it's moving our fats and our fat soluble vitamins, the vitamins we need. It's moving them around the body. So maybe pause, go out, take a walk, or when you're done with this short chapter, you can go out, take a little walk, and you'll feel better. The lymphatic organs, or what is helping our lymphatic system, is what we have to look at next. So this is where the lymphocytes, or those white blood cells, are located. But there is two different types of organs that we have. We have primary and secondary. So our primary lymphatic organs are the ones that are actually involved in producing those lymphocytes, or those white blood cells. And all blood cells originate in our red bone marrow, which is inside where? I'll let you look that up if you can't answer that right now. But our red bone marrow is also our red blood cells, our platelets, and our white blood cells. So our lymphocytes are the white blood cells. There are some that are called B cells, you can remember that as bone marrow. And these are going to hopefully mature, or some of them are going to mature, because that's what's going to help fight off those intruders that we don't want inside our body. Some of the immature lymphocytes will leave the inside of our red bone marrow, which is inside our bone, by the way, to answer that question earlier, and it's going to travel to our thymus gland. Our thymus is where our T cells are located. So you can see in that picture how they're showing you the red bone marrow, the T cells, the B cells, the flow, etc., the thymus gland. So when the T cells mature, they're going to enter the bloodstream. They're going to travel out to a lymphatic organ where hopefully they're going to help fight off things that we don't want inside our body. The thymus is an endocrine gland that is going to produce a couple hormones that we need. So back to chapter 24 to review, if you don't remember what these two hormones are for, thymosin and thymopyotins. I think I have that right. Sometimes I can't pronounce things, even though my brain is thinking of it. But anyway, the B cells and the T cells, which are working to help as part of our immune response. And hopefully we have some that are maturing better than others, just like people. Our secondary lymphatic organs and structures are the ones that we're probably more familiar with. Now, when you look at that picture, look at the very bottom, it's a lymph node. So our lymph node is what we more might think of as part of our structure that is part of our lymphatic system. But the B cells and T cells are what are part of that. So first of all, a lymph node has a job depending on where it's located. So you can see in the paragraph on 657, they're mentioning all the different places that they are located. If you look at that picture on 656, go back and look at all of those green dots, which are the lymph nodes. Those are the areas of accumulation that they are all throughout our body. That's not all of them pictured, it's just where they're located. So they're defined in our cervical region, axillary, inguinal, so lymph nodes themselves all throughout our body. The job of a lymph node is to filter the lymph or that fluid before it goes back out into our bloodstream. So the lymph nodes are the only ones that are filtering our lymph. And if you go back and look at what lymphatic fluid is, it's what is circulating between all of that interstitial fluid in the extracellular spaces within our tissue. So this is the inside of the inside of the inside of where everything is located. So lymph nodes have a very important job. They have to filter that lymph. There is also a secondary structure that is a type of tissue. So this is the MALT, mucosa-associated lymph tissue, and this is in different areas of our body. So it's along our respiratory and our gastrointestinal tract. On the top of 658, we have a couple of them listed out. We have our tonsils, Pyer patch, which is a little dangly thing that we'll talk about in the gastrointestinal chapter, chapter 28. It's kind of hanging off our small intestines. And then we also have our variform appendix. So probably you've heard of tonsils and appendix, and maybe we think of it in a bad way, but they are part of our lymphatic system. Again, they are working to help filter and move things through our lymphatic system, catch those things that we don't want in our body. The spleen, however, is our largest lymphatic organ. It's not a primary lymphatic organ. It is a secondary, but it is important because it is filtering the blood that the same way that a lymph node is filtering lymph. So our spleen is part of our lymphatic system. So it's storing those lymphocytes, those white blood cells that we need in order to fight off things. So when someone has, maybe they've lost their spleen, maybe they had an accident, a trauma, something, so they're just not going to be able to fight off things as easily as a body that has that storage of that. And the spleen is then just going to send out little bits out in the bloodstream during loss. Those, remember we looked at those jagged platelets that are trying to close up things. So the spleen is in charge of storing and also releasing that. But our body can live without a spleen. It just makes us a little bit more susceptible to things that we might not want in our body. So one of the things that I mentioned that you probably think of when you think of your lymphatic system is our resistance to disease. So first on page 658, we have the definition of resistance and susceptibility, so just that lack of resistance. But we do have mechanisms that are built into our body. We have non-specific, and then we have specific. So we want to look at what those resistance to diseases are. Under the non-specific, we have things that are physically and chemically there without us even thinking about it. So our earwax is a barrier. That's something that we want to collect all those things so that they don't get inside our ears. So that is both a physical and a chemical barrier. So just thought I'd throw the earwax in there. We also have the cellular response, so the inflammation that might occur when I have a problem in an area. My lymph nodes are going to collect it. They're going to hold a little bit of space, so they're going to cause inflammation. So that's our body's defense. That's a physical cellular response to a defense mechanism of something that has happened to my body. So even though we might think of earwax or inflammation or edema as being a bad thing, it means there's something going on that our body had to put off that defense mechanism to fight off some pathogen or foreign agent or defend against something that has happened. Inflammation is different than edema. I mentioned that earlier. On page 658, we have the definition of inflammation. And then we also have further local inflammation, which is also known as acute inflammation. Please know what that is. On the top of 659, we have systemic inflammation, which is different, and chronic inflammation, which is the opposite of acute or local. So please know all those different types of inflammation and what inflammation actually is. The specific defense mechanisms are when the B cells and the T cells are going to get involved. So that has to do with the ability of my body to respond to whatever that thing is that I don't want in my body. So that's a specific defense mechanism. Our body throws off the T cells to invade that pathogen, directly attack that foreign agent. The B cell, same thing. I want my body to produce something to fight against that. So those are specific things for immunity of my body that my body has recognized it. It's responded. It's sent out the B cells or the T cells based on whatever it's happening. So non-specific and specific. So specific can happen without us knowing it. Non-specific, we might notice that inflammation. We might notice that we have a lot of earwax happening, or maybe your nose has a lot of nasal secretions. Those are all factors of my body fighting off disease. But just like with everything, there can be dysfunctions that happen within my immune system. Immunodeficiencies is when my body basically can't protect itself from things that are not supposed to be in there. We also can have hypersensitivities, which is an it's an allergic reaction to an allergen. So being allergic to something is a hypersensitivity. So sometimes those terms are a mouthful. But allergies can be different, but hypersensitivity also can be different. So that's just when our body it's not doing what it's supposed to do. It thinks something is bad, so it develops that hypersensitivity or potentially an allergen. An autoimmune disease is also when my body decides to dysfunction. So it takes something that my body recognizes as being abnormal, even though it really isn't. So examples of an autoimmune are rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes. So just things that my body doesn't perform correctly with. People can be born with any or all of these type of dysfunctions, or they can come on later on in life.